Imagine walking into a bank in 1965 with $20,000 in your pocket. Not as a dream, not as a fantasy, as reality. You'd walk through those glass doors and every single person in that building would know, without you saying a word, that you had made it, that you were set, that your life and the lives of everyone you loved was going to be okay. $20,000 in 1965 wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was security. It was a whole different version of what life could look like. And if you're watching this right now, there's a good chance you've never felt that kind of financial breathing room. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because the world you're living in is fundamentally different from the one that existed back then. If this kind of story speaks to you, stick around. A lot of people who feel the same way have found a home on this channel. So let's go back. Let's really go back. And let's figure out what $20,000 could actually buy you in 1965. Because once you see it, you're never going to look at your wallet the same way again. In 1965, the median household income in the United States was around $6,900 a year. Let that sink in for a moment. That means $20,000 wasn't just a good amount of money. It was nearly 3 full years of what the average American family earned. 3 years of groceries, rent, car payments, school clothes, birthday presents, everything, all sitting in your hand at once. Today, the median household income is somewhere around $74,000 a year, which sounds like a lot more. But when you start doing the math, when you start looking at what things actually cost, something doesn't add up. And that's exactly what we're going to explore. Let's start with a house, because nothing tells the story of 1965 better than real estate. The average price of a new home in the United States in 1965 was approximately $20,000. You read that right. $20,000, the exact amount we're talking about, could buy you an entire house. Not a down payment, not a deposit, the whole thing. A real home, with a yard, in a real neighborhood, where your kids could ride their bikes after school, and your neighbors would wave at you from across the street. You could own that, completely. No mortgage hanging over your head for 30 years. No anxiety every time interest rates moved. Just yours. And if you didn't want to buy outright, if you wanted to keep some cash in your pocket, a 20% down payment on a home back then was around $4,000. Your monthly mortgage payment would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 to $80 a month. $60. Today, the average home in America costs well over $400,000. And in many cities, you're looking at $600,000, $700,000, even more. A monthly mortgage payment today on a median-priced home can easily run $2,500 to $3,000. The math has completely broken. The rules changed on everyone, and nobody sent out a warning. Now, let's say you bought that house for $20,000 and you still had money left over. What would you do with it? Well, in 1965, you could walk into a dealership and drive home in a brand new Ford Mustang, one of the most iconic cars ever made, for around $2,400. A Chevrolet Impala, the car that showed up in every driveway in every suburb in America, cost about $2,700. A brand new Cadillac, the symbol of having truly arrived, was somewhere around $5,000. So with just $20,000, you could have bought a house and a new car and still had money left to furnish the place and fill the refrigerator. That's not wealthy by today's standards. That's not even close to what $20,000 gets you now. Today, the average new car in America costs over $48,000. A basic sedan. Not a luxury vehicle. Just a regular car to get you to work and back. And speaking of work, let's talk about what it actually cost to build a life back then. Groceries in 1965 were a different world entirely. A loaf of bread was about 21 cents. A gallon of milk was around 95 cents. A pound of ground beef would set you back about 45 cents. A dozen eggs, 53 cents. A family of 4 could do a full week of grocery shopping for somewhere between $25 and $35. Today, that same cart of food, the same basic staples, nothing fancy, will run you $150, $175, sometimes more depending on where you live. The food hasn't changed, the need hasn't changed, but the price has quietly, relentlessly climbed while wages tried to keep up and mostly didn't. If you had $20,000 in 1965 and you were smart about it, you could have lived for years without touching another paycheck. You could have bought your home outright, paid cash for a reliable car, stocked your kitchen, and still had several $1,000s sitting in a savings account earning interest. Real interest, the kind banks actually paid back then, while you figured out your next move. That was the reality of that number. It wasn't fantasy. It was Tuesday. Now let's talk about something that might hit even closer to home: education. In 1965, the average annual tuition at a 4-year public university in the United States was around $243 a year, not a semester, the whole year. Private universities cost more, of course, but even at the more prestigious schools, annual tuition rarely crossed $2,000. That means with $20,000, you could have paid for a 4-year college education, yours, your child's, maybe even both, and still had the vast majority of your money left over. A degree wasn't a death sentence back then. It was an investment that actually made mathematical sense. Today, the average annual tuition at a public 4-year university is over $10,000 for in-state students, and private universities regularly charge $50,000 or more per year. Student loan debt in America has crossed $1.7 trillion. Trillion. An entire generation started their adult lives already underwater, before they ever had a real job, before they ever signed a lease or bought a car or saved a single dollar. And then there's the question of what a life actually looked like in 1965. Not just the numbers, but the texture of it, the feeling of it. A family of 4 in the mid-1960s could live comfortably, genuinely comfortably, on a single income. One person working a steady job could cover the mortgage, the car, the groceries, the kids' school supplies, a summer vacation, and still put a little something away every month. That wasn't luxury. That was just how it worked. The system, whatever its flaws, was structured in a way that allowed ordinary people to build ordinary lives without extraordinary sacrifice. There's something quietly devastating about that when you sit with it. Not anger exactly. Something softer than that. Something closer to grief. Because somewhere along the way that world started to slip. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But slowly, steadily, the gap between what things cost and what people earned began to widen. It started in the late 1960s and accelerated through the 1970s. Inflation hit hard, oil prices spiked, the economy shifted, manufacturing jobs that had sustained entire communities began to disappear, and the lifestyle that had felt so solid, so achievable, so normal, started to feel like something you had to fight for, something you had to hustle for, something that was always just slightly out of reach. 2 incomes became the standard, not the exception. Credit cards became a way of life. The 30-year mortgage became a milestone instead of an anomaly. And somewhere in that transition, people stopped asking whether the system was working for them and started asking how they could work harder for the system. What's strange is that by every measurable standard, Americans today have more stuff than people did in 1965. Bigger televisions, faster cars, smartphones that would have looked like science fiction to someone sitting in a diner in 1965, sipping a 15-cent cup of coffee. And yet something is missing. You can feel it. You've probably felt it yourself, maybe without being able to name it. It's the feeling of not quite catching up, no matter how fast you run. It's the feeling of doing everything right and still not feeling secure. It's the weight of a life that costs more than it should and delivers less than it promised. The people who lived through 1965 weren't smarter than you. They weren't more disciplined. They didn't have some secret that's been lost. They just happened to be alive at a moment when the math worked differently, when a dollar held more, when a salary went further, when a house was something you could actually own and not just be perpetually in debt for, when the future felt like something you were building toward rather than something you were barely keeping up with. There's a version of the American story where hard work leads to stability, where saving is possible, where the next generation does a little better than the last. That story was much easier to tell in 1965 than it is today. And that's not nostalgia talking, that's arithmetic. Maybe that's why these conversations matter. Not to romanticize a time that had its own very real problems, and it did, deeply, but to hold up a mirror to where we are now. To ask the question honestly, what changed, and who benefited from that change, and what does it mean for the choices we're making today? $20,000 in 1965 could buy a house, a car, a college education, and years of comfortable living. Today, that same amount barely covers a used car with high mileage or a few months of rent in most American cities. The number didn't change. The zeros are the same. But everything the number means has been quietly, steadily hollowed out. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just about dollars and cents. Not just about inflation charts or economic cycles, but about something harder to quantify. About what it feels like to live in a world where security is always one emergency away from disappearing. About what it costs, not financially, but emotionally, psychologically, to spend your life chasing a version of stability that used to come standard. The people who remember 1965 often say that life felt simpler then. And we usually assume they mean technologically, fewer devices, fewer distractions. But maybe what they really mean is that the math was simpler, that the gap between what you earned and what you needed was narrow enough that you could actually cross it, that you could stand on one side of that gap and see the other side clearly and believe, genuinely believe, that you could get there. Maybe we didn't just lose purchasing power over the decades. Maybe we lost something quieter than that. Something harder to measure. The sense that if you worked hard and lived carefully, the ground beneath your feet would hold. That the future was something you could plan for, not just survive. That $20,000 wasn't just money. It was proof that an ordinary life, lived by ordinary people, could be enough. And somewhere deep down, most of us are still looking for that proof.